This is Jonathan Ferguson, the Keeper of Firearms and Artillery at the Royal Armouries Museum in the UK, which houses a collection of thousands of iconic weapons from throughout history. And on this episode, Jonathan's back with the Call of Duty franchise, this time taking a look at the weapons from Modern Warfare 2 Remastered.
I'm not quite sure why the teddy bear has the gold deagle, and I hate myself for saying this, but this is a really nice rendition of a gold Desert Eagle.
If you want to see Jonathan's take on Call of Duty, boy have we got a lot of videos for you. Make sure to check our back catalogue with those. You can find a link to our playlist in the description of this video. And if you enjoy this kind of content, make sure to keep an eye out for our new series, Loadout, a show where we take a look at the history and impact of some of the most iconic weapons in gaming. From the M1 Garand and the Desert Eagle through to the minigun and the AK-47. Naturally, Jonathan will be making a fair few appearances over on that show too, so make sure to check it out. Right, let's take a look at Modern Warfare 2 Remastered.
Move up, let's go!
The venerable M4, M4A1. It's another one of these M4s that isn't actually an M4. Well, sort of. So the original Modern Warfare 2 M4 had a not M4 barrel profile. It was something like an M653 or something, pencil barrel as they're called. And then it did have this very weird rail system handguard with the vented portion between the rail and the actual handguard. If I remember rightly, this was taken from an airsoft replica that wasn't a faithful replica of the M4, which is why it's ended up in the game, and it doesn't actually look exactly like an M4A1 should. So what should an M4A1 look like? Well, one upgrade they have made to this model is the M4 barrel profile. This isn't actually an M4 either, by the way. I'll explain that in a minute. But the barrel is the correct profile. So it's the 14.5-inch barrel, and it has this, it's the thick M16A2 barrel profile, so better for accuracy. But to accommodate the M203 grenade launcher, what they had to do was keep this section reduced diameter. So that's why you get that distinctive notch in the barrel that is distinctive of the M4 and M4A1. Anything that doesn't have a 14.5-inch barrel with that cut on it is not an M4. Or an A1. So what am I going on about in terms of this not being an M4? Well, it's the closest thing we have in the collection right now to an M4. The only external difference that the eagle-eyed would spot is this flash hider, flash suppressor, which is an A1 style, not an A2 style. But actually, if you were to take a micrometer to this and look at all of the details, you'd realize this is not actually a US GI M4. Differs in various respect, including having England written on the side, because this is actually made for a British company. So it's an interesting piece of firearms history, but not strictly an M4, but that's okay, because neither is Modern Warfare 2's rifle.
RPG teams. If that bridge layer gets hit, we're swimming. Alan, switch the M403.
I think it might be worth talking briefly about automatic versus semi-automatic fire, because this bit of footage here, we do get a good sense here of the amount of dispersion of shot of bullets on target at this distance. It's quite, using a mouse or whatever you're using, but it's relatively hard to control versus the sort of fire that we see a little bit after that with rapid semi-automatic fire. And that is now standard in militaries around the world. It's actually very similar to what you see in the game, whether you're pulling a trigger on a controller or tapping a mouse button or pulling a trigger on a real gun. The thing just moves around less. You can train to shoot very, very rapidly, semi-automatic, and the effective rate of fire is not 700 rounds per minute or whatever, but it's far more economical in terms of ammunition. You're far more likely to hit what you're aiming at any kind of distance. It's funny that even a game like Call of Duty that is not, it's got a realistic kind of veneer, but it doesn't purport to be a military simulator or anything. It's funny that even in a game like that, it can be more effective to not use automatic fire, but it's almost never as fun. The 1887, which has always irked me in Modern Warfare. It's about the furthest thing you could get from Modern Warfare in terms of hardware. But it's a fun gun to use nonetheless in the game. And actually, I think they've done a really good job of modeling this. You can look at details and nitpick, as I sometimes do, but I'm going to give it a bit of a pass. Even the way it's opened up there to top off, which you can do, obviously with a tube-fed weapon like this, I guess it's the only advantage for me that this weapon ever had in multiplayer was you didn't have to time your magazine reloads. You could just thumb in some extra cartridges and be a bit more prepared. The only other thing I'd say about the 1887 is that I'm happy they didn't tactical it. The only concession to a vaguely modern iteration of the design are the sort of combat, pistol combat style sights that are on there, which on the original Winchester 1887, well, there aren't any sights. There's a shallow groove on the receiver, and lining up the muzzle with that is all you need for effectively instinctive shooting or close range shooting. But hey, if you like your Winchester 1887, this is probably the best iteration of it. Feel free to argue that one.
You take the one on the left. On three. 1, 2, 3.
I don't know. I think this might be where the first sign of modern warfare drifting toward sci-fi warfare. I think someone probably read the original Rainbow Six novel where they literally had heartbeat censored, which I think Tom Clancy based on some rescue firefighting equipment that could detect something through a wall that's clearly gone nowhere since then. And he extrapolated this to be literally like a magic box that could see things through walls. Modern Warfare 2 turned it into a weapon-mounted accessory, which meant mounting a piece of Picatinny rail to the side of the receiver, which is something you wouldn't normally do. It was fun gameplay, but if you're nerdy about guns like me, it was a bit off-putting. Now, the Masada was licensed to Remington/Bushmaster, depending on whether you're going to buy the Select Fire version or the civilian semi-automatic version, and turned into the advanced combat rifle, the ACR. And this is a relatively early example from our collection. Interesting little detail, and full disclosure, Dave spotted this. This is the Magpul Pmag. Now, when the character is inspecting the rifle, if you look closely, that magazine is hanging almost all the way out of the gun, when it should be all the way into the gun. What you're seeing there, the little notch that's just shy of the lip of the magazine well, is actually part of the magazine catch system. The magazine catch engages into that notch. Minor detail, but we like to spot those things on here.
Roger that. Let's get to that rally point.
AK-47, but is it? Sort of is the answer. It is a mashup, and it's modernized appropriately for a modern warfare game. So the milled receiver is combined with various features of AKM sheet metal version of the AK. So it's kind of like the main two variants, if you like, the classic milled receiver AK and the stamped sheet receiver AKM. Okay, became the AK-74, the AK-100 series. It's got features of both. Now, there are foreign countries to Russia that is, that produce AK variants that are something of a mishmash, but they usually stick to one or the other pattern for the various components. What I'm getting at is that Russia no longer produces machined receiver Kalashnikovs. They've moved over entirely to the stamped receiver type, and so this being the main weapon of the Russians in the game wasn't realistic when the original game was released, and of course it still isn't. On the most fundamental level, when the Russians are using it, it's completely the wrong gun. And then if you look at it in detail, it is a sort of weird parts kit build of different types of AK. Something is sticking out for me here with the AUG, or AUG, whichever you prefer. The original Modern Warfare 2 version had like a rail carry handle, like the H-bar behind me, a side rail, as it were. And then to that is attached whatever optical sight you wish. With the remastered version, they've reverted to the integral carry handle scope mount of the original AUG, which is kind of cool. It's got more of that classic die-hard look to it. But I think I'm right in saying that that's resulted in it being very high, because originally you had semi-carry handle mount, and then you had a version of the integral optic that was piggybacked on top of that. That made the height over bore of the sight very tall. They seem to have kept the height of the optic and then just converted it back to its old shape, if that makes sense. So why is that a problem? Well, if it was a real gun, ideally you want a cheek weld. You don't want a chin weld. It's less stable. Otherwise, it's looking pretty good. Perhaps better in terms of accuracy to the original model, and of course the graphics on the game are vastly improved. The textures are much better. But it's interesting looking to see what's changed over the original iteration of the game. They haven't just retextured or even remodeled from scratch. They have, I think, completely recreated all of the models from scratch, and that has given them artistic license to incorporate features that either weren't there before, or in this case, to eliminate features that were there before.
2, 1, lock.
As I'm sure a lot of you will know, the mysteriously named intervention is actually the Shitak M200 model. Now, we don't have any Shitak rifles in this collection, so I can't comment on the details of it. Looks good to me. It looks much improved, as all of the graphics in the game are, and it's lost none of that sort of thump and the sort of visceral experience of a rifle of this nature, which obviously Modern Warfare 2 wasn't the first to do that by any means. But I think the move from the Barrett, which we've seen in other games, to a bolt action adds something. It makes it feel like each shot is counting more, and of course you have to make each shot count a little more, because you can't just follow it up with the next shot. And that's not a problem for people who use these things for real, because they're generally doing so from quite some distance. This is really not very far away. That's not to say they're not used at that distance, but you'd probably want a semi-automatic rifle if you were having to fight with a rifle like this. But I defer to the soldiers on that one. I've got to say, this is a really nice representation of an absolutely ludicrous weapon. The Desert Eagle has obviously appeared in countless games at this point. It's more of a star of screen of one sort or another than it will ever be a practical handgun. But there's just something about the thing. It's so crazy. It's huge. The recoil, the sound, the look of the thing, all captured really well here. Particularly good sound effects. I don't know if it's just the speakers I'm using today, but really sounds quite chunky. The recoil is not only significant but controlled. You know, the user clearly has the wrist strength to deal with this thing, but also the coils convincingly sort of up and to the right, which with a two-handed grip it will tend to do. Shoot it one-handed, which is perfectly doable. It will, like most pistols, tend to recoil up and left. It's just to do with the sort of biomechanics of how you grasp the thing. And of course, it makes quite the impression on the enemy, as it ought to. 50 caliber rounds, going some speed, weighing a fair bit, impacting with some force. Even through soft body armor, they're gonna make a serious impact. I'm not quite sure why the teddy bear has the gold deagle, and I hate myself for saying this, but this is a really nice rendition of a gold Desert Eagle. They've captured the sort of the surface finish and shine that you get with a decently gold-plated gun. Can't believe I'm being positive about a gold gun in a game, or even in real life for that matter. But yeah, hey, if you're gonna rock a gold deagle, it may as well be this one. FNFAL, or FAL if you prefer. Interesting little details of the new models they've created here. So I think in the original game there were either no rounds modeled or something very basic when you took a magazine out of a gun. Here we've got a nicely modeled sheet metal magazine, and we've got 1, 2, 3 visible rounds. Maybe there are 4 in there, but then we can see what looks like a follower. Now this is supposed to be a full magazine, but it's only actually loaded in the game world with maybe 4 rounds. Now that's super harsh of me to look at this in this freeze frame detail. If we were trying to replicate the full mechanics of a firearm for a game, well, ideally you'd want to model the spring, you'd want all the rounds in there. Of course, practically speaking, there's rarely a need to do all of that. But they've really come on in modeling things like bolts, rounds in mags, things like that. So again, I'm being extremely critical. the iconic FAMAS here, and I do believe it's the proper representation rather than the Modern Warfare 2019 version with its weird gas system that was grafted on for reasons that I don't understand. Now, more glaring than any of that is all of that tape. Why does this thing have so much tape on it? Now, some of you know that I'm not a fan of bandaging and taping. Here, though, I think what they're going for is taping as a camouflage technique. I'm not sure this is the best job ever, but this is a somewhat valid technique that is done now. I think taping is somewhat out of fashion, but the idea is to break up the outline, the silhouette, and if you have it, as on this, a flat black surface, which actually stands out quite badly. This is why you see so many brown and green rifles now, is because just plain black actually can stand out quite badly certainly against a nicely camouflaged person and against the background. So you need to break up that silhouette. I think that's what this is doing. Or maybe they have copied, maybe they've used reference of a photo of the guy with a taped up rifle for Arctic type training and have sort of done a version of that maybe isn't as taped as it ought to be. It's times like this when I see someone having a whale of a time with dual-wielded mini Uzis, very nicely rendered as well, I might say. Nice high rate of fire. Times like this, I think Call of Duty should just lean into the action movie thing fully, rather than sort of pretending to be a serious military shooter, which it can be sometimes, and do something straight out of an action movie. You know, when I see something like this, that's just not something a soldier would almost never do. I think we'd be better off in more of an action scenario. Of course, we get the dubious off-screen reload, because how would you actually reload these? Well, you wouldn't. If you're going to do a full-on action movie game, you would just fire them till they're empty and throw them to the ground, pick up more weapons. If I have a criticism of these mini Uzis, it's the case ejection. It's a little old school. It's coming out very slowly, very sideways, really kind of early 2000s first-person shooter. They should really be flying out quite a steep angle, quite hard, spinning through the air as they go.
Forward to it. Give my regards to Sakayev if you get there first. So, don't get pinned down out there. Keep heading west to the runway area.
Okay, that's a nice touch. So we're looking at an RPD here, and I was thinking, how are they going to deal with that Picatinny rail mount? So they've got a system here with a pivoting side rail. So the character has to pivot the rail out of the way before he can then lift the top cover to reload the machine gun as you would normally reload a machine gun. So they've actually thought about how this system is working. They've gone for a side mount, as is Russian design tradition, rather than a rail fixed to the top cover. Now, that probably would have been the way to go, but it does give us a little bit of interesting variety in how the gun has to be operated, and it slightly delays your reloading animation, which may or may not be significant. So, as it proclaims on the side of this rifle, we have a Mark 17 Mod 0, US Navy terminology for the FN SCAR. So ours is in fact marked with the FN markings, FN Hostile Belgium, SCAR H, Cal 760x51. This thing has special operations command markings, basically. So obviously it's a service version. This is a commercial version. And I mean commercial in the sense that it's not for issue to a specific military. It is select fire, has the same selector as the one in the game does. Interestingly, the one in the game has much more prominent circular depressions around the A for automatic, the 1 for single shot or semi-automatic, and the S for safe, presumably, although I can't see that in this view. This is much more flush. Now, I don't know if that's a production change over time, but I can see that there's a heck of a lot of detail on this model. This is really very close to the real thing. We've even got the little grub screw in the back of the selector there. Good job on this one. not a bad H&K UMP 45, except that it's not an H&K UMP 45. It's an S&M UMP 45. Schmidt and Meyer is what's actually written on the side of the quite nicely rendered polymer receiver there. Amusingly, the serial number, which should be on a metal part of the receiver on the side of the gun, appears here, M1 Garand style, on the back of the receiver. So within your field of view as a player, it says S/N for serial number, and then it says, sort of in Leet speak, or a mixture of letters and numbers, McTavish, which is a reference that if you don't get, you probably shouldn't be watching this video. Another marking on the gun is a real marking, and it's increasingly common, has been since, I guess, the late 90s. And that is markings like refer to owner's manual, which is what's on the side of this gun. That is not some sort of joke. That is literally what's written on quite a few firearms these days. Health and safety is just as important when you're dealing with firearms, perhaps more so than other consumer products. And legally speaking, companies are obliged to put warnings like that. Now, I'm not sure that a military issue firearm won't say refer to owner's manual. They're not bound by the same legal requirements. But hey, this is A, fictional, and B, has probably been purchased for some sort of off-the-shelf special operations purpose. Who knows? Join us again next time, of course. We've also got videos on the Royal Armouries YouTube channel that you might well want to check out. A bit more of a historical dive into guns in general. Other arms and armour are on that channel as well. And we have our own sort of social media, of course, the museums, if you can visit, events going on as well. And if you feel moved to do so, we'd appreciate a donation as well. Thanks, guys. Take care.